Over 6,000 people took my survey about the D&D 5e weapon system, which is way more responses than I thought I would get. So thank you. And over 95% of you said that new, unique features for all or most of our weapons would make them more fun. And I agree. But remember, part of our goal is to maintain the simple framework that makes 5e accessible. So to get some inspiration for new, optional features and potentially some new weapons, I included this question in the survey. Given the opportunity, what new types of weapons would you add to the basic rules of 5e and why? And last weekend, I spent a lot of time reading through over 1,500 write-ins and compiling those responses into a list of what happened to be the 69 most wanted weapons that are not officially in D&D 5e. So as we go through these results together, I will be brainstorming about which existing weapons these could become new features for, which few may become new weapons entirely, and which ones should probably not end up in our new system. But I hope you follow along and consider which ones your players would really love to use and leave comments about how we can make them part of our games. Because I'm Bob, this is where we learn how to have more fun playing D&D together, and the least most wanted weapon is technically the peasant railgun because it was requested by like one person, and if you don't know what that is, it's just like a weird hack in the rules, not actually a weapon. Now let's get into it. So for our purposes, the least most wanted weapons are the Kriss Dagger and the Barbed Net. Now the Kriss Dagger is interesting because as far as I could tell, it's just a dagger with a wavy blade. Maybe that would do more damage, but more damage is not really what we're after with these features. We want them to be unique features, some of them even utility rather than combat-based. The Barbed Net, however, is actually a really cool addition because I could see that raising the DC required of our regular net. It's usually like a DC 10 strength athletics check, I think, that they have to use their action to get out of. So I would say the Barbed Net would probably have a higher DC, maybe as high as like 15, and maybe it could deal some damage. And the yo-yo is another one that could maybe be a whip, which is another weapon much like the net that we really need to redesign. But to me, the yo-yo also feels a lot like a flail. Regardless, it'll be fun to incorporate because the yo-yo is just such a unique weapon, and for folks like you and me who have some nostalgia for classic Super Smash Bros., or I guess Smash Bros. 64, whatever it was, with Ness as a character using that yo-yo, it's got to be in D&D. And the first of our very unique kinds of polearms listed here was the Shaolin Spade. And yeah, there were a lot of very specific polearms suggested in this survey, and a lot of them I just kind of lumped to their main features. Like we'll see Spike Hammer polearm and Spike Axe polearm and stuff like that. But this one, since it would probably just have one damage type, much like our next one, the Hammer polearm, just one damage type, I guess I don't know if there are any bludgeoning polearms currently, so maybe that would be a neat one, the hammer, but I don't really know about this Shaolin Spade. Our first sword is the Gladius, which I've always thought that's kind of what the regular short sword was. Like it's a finesse kind of stabbing. Maybe this wouldn't be finesse, maybe it would just be for strength only, but it's a piercing weapon. I don't know, we kind of already have that one. This next one that was suggested by a non-negligible amount of people is the Frying Pan, and same number suggested the Pitchfork as weapons. But overall, a lot of people, we'll see further down the list, suggested better options for improvised weapons, so I think it could be cool to include a couple silly ones in our actual weapons list, or maybe just a new feature that certain characters could get for using improvised weapons. But if I had to say it, the Frying Pan would probably be a club, and the Pitchfork would definitely be a polearm, much like another farming polearm style implement that we'll see near the very highest end of our list at the end of the video. And the Tower Shield. This is the first of a few shields. Overall, I'm inclined to not put shields in whatever our final product here ends up being because they're armor. They're technically armor in 5e, not weapons. So maybe just some simple feature for how to use certain kinds as a weapon, but the Tower Shield, that's explicitly just a big shield for defense, would probably not be one of them. And a weapon I had never heard of before, the Sling Staff. I listed it as a type of sling, although it could be a polearm or staff, of course, is literally a big stick that gets you maybe a little more range than a regular swinging sling. But I think the point is that you can throw much heavier objects, and maybe it would be less accurate, but this is great because the sling definitely needs some variance. A lot of people like the sling and think it should be changed, so the staff sling is one way we can do that. Some more specific swords we had here were the Flamberge, much like the Kris, is a wavy sword. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's a wavy blade, so maybe more damage. Maybe that would be all it gets though, is a little more damage, and then you'd miss out on some of the cool features of other swords. For example, the Pata, P-A-T-A, is a sword that has a gauntlet, like a whole thing covering your hand while you use it. But it doesn't seem like a big enough area defended to warrant a raised AC, so I don't really know if that one's going to make it. Unlike throwing sand, pocket sand, this is something that I feel like everyone has tried to do in D&D early on. I know in my first party we did this a lot, and our DM kind of homebrewed rules to make it work every once in a while. Overall, I think this would have to be a really low DC to blind somebody, but I don't see why it shouldn't be in the game. Like, it's something there should be a mechanic for. Everyone tries it. Come on. And now, here we go. The hammer with a spike on the end. Apparently, this is what actual warhammers were like, but I think in D&D 5e, they wanted to keep weapons very simple with a single damage type for each one. So a hammer with a spike on the end that you could choose between bludgeoning damage and piercing damage is a no-brainer. That's something that's going to come up in a handful of other weapons, and I think it's great. That's an important feature for our new system. Okay, some other quick ones here near the end of our list were a harpoon, which I could see as being a cool variant of the spear. It'd be very similar, except maybe, of course, it's launching, so maybe it has a higher range, and it could have a rope tied to it. So I like that as an idea. The sword cane, which would be a concealable kind of sword, maybe explicitly for rapiers or other really thin, small blades. The studded club, which I'm not jazzed about, because the studded club sounds to me just like a higher damage club. I don't know if that really is important for our fun new features. And the Estoc sword, E-S-T-O-C, this was suggested by a bunch of people, and specifically some people mentioned that it would be dex-based and piercing. So if you've ever heard of an Estoc sword, let me know if dex-based and piercing sounds right to you. If so, maybe that warrants a spot in the game. Alright, some more polearm type things. The sectioned staff. Now, I think this one could be more of a flail. Specifically, it's a 3-section staff. Think of it like a giant set of nunchucks that someone is constantly whipping around. Personally, I could see this having like an AC boost. My only fear is that this would be like the most powerful monk weapon. So maybe it couldn't be used as a monk weapon, but then many people would be like, it's gotta be a monk weapon because it has that real world flavor that a lot of the monk weapons are supposed to have. And especially if we made it a polearm and not a flail, in general, we gotta be really careful with anything we do with polearms because there is some feats that people use specifically for like polearm master that people specifically use for builds to make really powerful characters. So we gotta be careful with polearms. But another one was the Godentag, the Gutentag, I think is how you pronounce it actually. Literally means like good day in Dutch, I guess. And I was very skeptical at first. It looked like it's just a spear because it's a stick with a spike on the end. But this also can be used as a club, which makes it pretty unique. Again, we have a piercing and a bludgeoning weapon together. I think it's pretty neat. And this next one was hilarious to me. It's a variant of a club. Specifically, actually there are two kinds here. The Kosh and the Sap. I'll throw up a picture. It's a teeny tiny little club. And I thought that was so funny because so many people actually said or rated the club as a weapon that should just be either taken out of the game or only kept in the game if you change it. And obviously, the reason no one's picking the club is because it has like no damage. But then so many people suggested, I mean, not so many, it is near the bottom of our list, but a non-negligible amount of people suggested this little baby club. But the neat thing about it is that it is specifically meant to be concealed. So for that reason, and that reason alone, I think keeping it with the same damage but making the club concealable is a cool feature. The War Fan, I think this is another awesome club variant. Originally I was like, wow, this could be a new weapon. But club, because when it's closed, you're just whacking people with it, but when it's open, you can use it for slashing damage. Very cool. Also very flavorful. I could really see this being a great like bard, rogue, or monk weapon even. And the slingshot. So originally I was going to delete these responses. I was like, that's what we already have. It's a sling, right? But no, the slingshot, like a tiny little wrist rocket that's much more discreet to use than a thing you're swinging around your head, I think is actually an important variation on the sling. Again, the sling needs some cool variants. This is one of them. And what I'm going to call the Studded Great Club, I'll put the name on the screen, was suggested by a bunch of people. I don't want to try to pronounce it and like butcher it, but it's a really cool weapon. It would kind of just be like higher damage, but it would also allow us a different damage type because these studs could really be like spiked or serrated in some way. That's a cool feature. And another shield here, the buckler, it's like a tiny shield that you could use while like wielding other weapons. I think there's a place for that in D&D. I don't know why we don't have it already, but I don't know if it makes sense for this supplement. Just do it in your games though. And the arming sword, this is another like very specific sword type that we saw here. And some people listed it as one-handed. Okay, some people said it would be a long sword, but not versatile. I don't know if it's piercing or slashing. Too many swords have too many specific uses. I'm kind of not a fan of changing it up this much, but maybe, maybe. We'll see. The spear, and specifically the Yikwula, I don't know how to pronounce that one either, but it's a one-handed spear, already in D&D, in Tomb of Annihilation. It does a little more damage than a regular spear and has shorter range, so maybe there's a place for that. And the Ninetales whip. Yes, we definitely need more whips, and we're gonna see a bunch of better whip ideas that are way near the top of our list. But the Ninetales whip, yeah, definitely. Maybe it would have like a piercing effect instead of slashing. I could see that. A repeating crossbow, though, it's like too much like a gun to me. Oh man, that would probably make things like sharpshooter and crossbow expert like way too overpowered. So I don't know. I'd have to do a little research, but I don't think so. And here's where we had improvised weapon options. A bunch of people were just like, better improvised weapons, better improvised weapons. So I think there has to be something written into this final product about how we can make improvised weapons a little more fun to use and more variable, like more equivalent to certain types of weapons for everybody. Because why not? Like, that is how you build creativity into your combats, when people can just grab anything and use it in the moment. And a couple more pole type weapons here. A pole flail. I like it because it doesn't already exist, and it has a feature of maybe like getting around shields. That's cool. A long spear. This could be, of course, a variant on the spear, could be a pole arm, but the idea is it's a reach weapon, piercing, two-handed. Think of like Neanderthals hunting a mammoth, right? Like, that is the long spear we are missing. The bill hook, which is really cool. I definitely want this because the whole idea is, yeah, it's kind of like a glaive. You can slash, you can spike, but there's also a hook on it. And you know how I said I actually changed the names of a couple of these things? Like there was the Bec de Corbin suggested a bunch, but it's like, okay, it's a hammer with a spike on the end. So I tried to make the names more self-explanatory. The bill hook I kept because it's a hook. Like, that's the cool feature. You can trip people. That's neat. Oh, and then here we go, the spike hammer. So the Bec de Corbin, I don't know how to say it. It's a mix of damage types. That's what we need. And now some more swords. The broadsword and claymore, I lumped them together because as far as I could tell with a little bit of research, these were kind of the same thing. Maybe I should have lumped it with this next one, happened to be very next in line, is the Zweihander, I think is sort of how you pronounce that. And that one literally means like either hand and a half or two-hand sword. I forget which one. But the point is, Zweihander, like in its name, is always going to be a big, heavy sword that needs to be wielded by a strong person. And this is a really important addition because somewhere, either in the comments on that video or in the responses of this survey, someone said it's really dumb that a dagger and a greatsword have the same range. And I totally agree. I never really thought about that, but it's ridiculous. So the Zweihander can totally be like a longer range greatsword. Maybe keep the same damage, but just give it more reach. I think that's cool. I don't know. That might be a problem with like Great Weapon Master then. Still something to look into, but I think it's a good idea. And now maybe our first new weapon, because I don't know what other kind of weapon this could be mapped onto, is the garrote or garrote. It's literally a little string or wire that is used to strangle people. Pretty brutal, but a lot of people suggested it, and there's nothing like it in the game. So I think it deserves a place, but maybe it would just be like an improvised weapon, right? Maybe it is just a rope. I don't know. All right, and I'm going to fly through the next handful here because they're all like very different categories of weapons. But we have a Sword Breaker Dagger, a dagger with deep serrations that is meant to catch other blades. That's cool. It's a disarm feature. I love it. Explosives, I don't really think so. That feels like it should be a different document to me. Polearm with an axe and a hammer. Yes, we already talked about this. That would be slashing and bludgeoning. Mix up those damage types. Let's do it. The Bastard Sword, as far as I could tell, the literal definition for this is it's just like between the length of a short sword and a long sword. A man catcher, which is a polearm that literally has like this spiked, like barbed thing that you can grab people like around the waist or neck with. That's a unique, like, grappling polearm weapon. Definitely needs to be added. This one, though, like, would it be a variant of a traditional polearm that's like an attacking weapon? Or would it be a variant of the staff? I could see it being a staff instead. Ooh, and another awesome whip variant here, the Blade Whip, aka the Yorumi, which is literally flexible steel ribbons that is apparently very dangerous to use from the demonstration videos that I watched, but it's a really cool, unique weapon that is such an awesome way to make the whip cooler. Yes, it just does slashing damage like the regular whip, but maybe it would be, again, adding a little bit to your AC because it's something that you have to keep in constant motion, but it's also really cool aesthetically because people can wear it around them and then literally whip it out to fight. I think that's an awesome weapon for a fantasy game. And a lot of people who wanted a bashing shield. Again, maybe I'll just list like a little feature for how you do that with regular shields. Some swords. The saber, which people specifically said should be one-handed and finesse. And my question then is, do we keep it slashing or is it a piercing weapon? Because that will determine whether or not it's actually different from other things already in the game. And a dual-bladed sword. Obviously, everybody loves like that Darth Maul style. I think that's an important thing to have in the game. Definitely cool for a fantasy game. We need that. So would it be a polearm? Would it be a staff? Or would it be like a variant on the short sword, since it's kind of just like two short swords put together? Tell me in the comments. Another really cool club variant is the tonfa, basically like a baton, because it can be used defensively, because you hold it on a peg on the side, but then it also has this long section here, so you can literally block with it, you can push with it, you can like whip it around and strike people. Maybe wouldn't have higher damage, but again, maybe can add a little to your AC and should definitely be a monk weapon. And now we have another blade that I'm not sure about, the kukri. And I just didn't really understand how this couldn't be just a reflavored dagger or a reflavored short sword. And here we go, the atlatl, to double or even like triple your range on throwing a spear. That's such an easy thing we can add. Why does 5e not have that already? It would make the spear actually useful. Let's do it. Followed by the spike shield, which is our first and really only like purely, not purely, but equally offensive and defensive shield that's suggested in here. So maybe something like that could make it into this doc. But yeah, shields are probably going to be in some armor supplement that we create together down the line. Another whip, the chain and sickle, or I forget what the word, but there's a specific word for this. It's a historical like Japanese weapon. It's honestly like very unique having the sickle attached, like a whole other weapon attached to it. So that's one to think about, but definitely a lot of people want it. We're going to put it in here somehow. And the boomerang is another that a lot of people wanted. Apparently it's already in the basic rules, but for some reason not in the player's handbook, at least not in mine. So we should just put that in, and it seems like our first thing that is actually a unique weapon. It's kind of like a bludgeoning dart, because I guess, of course it's not going to come back if you actually hit something with it, I think. I think that's how boomerangs work. And the Great Bow or War Bow were two that I put together, and I'm so happy this was pretty high on the list because this is something that I've wanted in the game the whole time I've been playing D&D, just a strength-based or at least a finesse bow that you can use as dexterity or strength. It could have maybe more range than a longbow even, because it's definitely a variant of a longbow. It's got to be huge, maybe a little more damage, but I don't want it to just be a purely better longbow that everyone's going to try to use. I guess the thing is that it can only be used by strength-based characters if we do keep it to just strength, but then is that a problem giving our strength-based characters like really good damage from far away? Probably a problem, especially with like the sharpshooter feat. It's another thing we got to consider. There's definitely a lot going on with these weapons, but the Great Bow, it's got to be in here somewhere. And actually, it is in Waterdeep Dragon Heist. There's like an NPC who has a great bow. So I'll have to check out how that one works. Okay, now we're getting into the really highly requested weapons here. So we have a cutlass or falchion. I put those together because they looked very similar to me, but they also look a lot like the scimitar. I'm not really sure how it's different from the scimitar, so maybe someone let me know in the comments, but yeah, they really look like the same thing, dude. And knives. I wrote this as being a variant of the dagger. It could be concealable. It could be like more specifically designed for throwing. So maybe it would be a weaker dagger, or maybe it just stays a D4, but it's like longer range or more accurate somehow. So maybe higher damage, but ultimately just better concealed. I think that's important. And the whip chain. This is, I think, sometimes called like a 9-section whip, or I don't really know. Like, of course, we could flavor this two ways. This could be a length of chain, like regular chain links, or it could be this like many steel sectioned thing. In either case, it's a weapon that's in motion a lot, so maybe it has a defensive property, but what I really like is that it is a bludgeoning whip rather than slashing. So again, giving us some variance with the damage type for players who really want to capitalize on the whip. Very cool. And here we go. This was some of my favorites as well. Variants on, well, I wrote them as being variants on the net, but bolas or a lasso. So literally something that you're swinging to trip people, trap them, grapple them, restrain them in some way. So it would probably be a matter of varying ranges, varying DCs to get out of them, and not disadvantaged to freaking use all the time. Like, the net is so dumb. All right, and maybe a brand new weapon, the chakram. This is a razor sharp ring of steel. It is explicitly a ranged weapon, so the only thing I could think of mapping it onto would be the dart, but it would be like a way better dart, so definitely higher damage, and maybe a different damage type, because dart must be piercing, so this would probably be slashing. And I'm going to throw in another one here. Another highly suggested thing were throwing stars. Of course, like, people want shurikens, so throwing stars, to me, that is, because it's just tinier, I think of it more like a dart anyway, and it would probably just be higher damage. Like, instead of, I think dart is just 1 point, maybe dart is D4, in which case throwing star should just be a dart, probably. Maybe that should be a D6, because it's like still bigger and, weightier than a dart, maybe. I don't really know what these darts are supposed to look like. Okay, some other ninja-style weapons here. We have the nunchucks, which I think should just be a variant on the flail, because that's what it is. But maybe, honestly, it'd be like a weaker flail, because instead of like a hunk of metal, you're just swinging another stick around. The sai, or parrying dagger, so similar to our blade catcher, this is, one of our Ninja Turtles has these. It's a spiked dagger that you can catch blades with and draw them away. And just having that parrying or disarming feature is definitely something that we want more of in the game. At least I do. Okay, there's where the throwing star actually is. And now, again, that I put together, the hook sword or khopesh. So the khopesh is an Egyptian sword that does just like have a big curve in it. And the whole idea is that I guess you can use it to trip people. I love that. That is something that should totally already exist, so definitely on my list, and I'm glad it was this high in the list in general. And here's our other bow. I put together the composite, compound, and recurve, because a bunch of people suggested all three of those things, but I put them together because, in my mind, they're achieving the same thing functionally. They are all basically shorter bows that have more power. So maybe they would be higher damage, maybe they're just higher range than a regular short bow. I think in either case, like, they must be included somehow. And before we get to our most popular suggestions overall, there are only 6 left that you probably want in your game and have probably already made some homebrew rules for, but we get to geek out over them together in a second. This is where I ask you to like this video if you've been finding any of these ideas useful, or if you want to join Patreon, patrons actually have access to an unlisted video where I go through all of the survey results. So if you really want to be part of this process, or just have a bigger hand in supporting me while we create it together, joining Patreon is a great way to do that. Now, the chain whip slash with a ball and a spike. Maybe it has an AC boost, but overall, again, it's a bludgeoning type of whip, and it can be, like, that ball could just be replaced with a spike or a dagger of some kind, creating different damage types, maybe piercing if you're lunging it right out at people, or slashing if you're like whipping it around them and cutting them. lots of variation. I love it, and it makes sense that it's this high on the list. Another one I was super happy to see is fist-type weapons, but specifically here, blades or claws, or a punching dagger was very highly suggested. So highly that I can only assume it must have been in an older edition. But this I love to see because when I played a monk for the first time several years ago, the first thing I asked for as a homebrew monk weapon was like claws that I could have in my palms that would also like help me climb. I thought that was so cool, and I was like, why doesn't this already exist? So very neat to see it on our list this high up. And here we go. In the top 4, we have the katana. Now, this is something that is either listed under monks or in the DMG somewhere about how you can already just make a little variant on the longsword to make a katana for your character, but I think people were just really wanted baked into the rules with specific abilities. Like the thing that I wrote down that a lot of people asked for was saying that it should be finesse. Some people saying it should be versatile. Some people saying it should have a quick draw feature that maybe gives you advantage on your first attack in combat with it. All of those are neat ideas, and overall, there were enough neat ideas about the katana that I'm sure it will make it into our list compared to a bunch of those other swords that seemed way too similar, or at least people didn't give me enough information to make it more distinct from existing swords. So katana, I think we're in good shape. And now number 3, which I'm kind of disappointed that it was this high in the list because it is not the direction I wanted to take this supplement, is firearms. So many people ask for like more guns or more detailed rules for guns and firearms, but I feel like that's its own project down the line. And I don't know if I'm the one for it, really, because it's just not something that I use a lot in the game. And now, our top 2, the most highly requested weapons were the scythe as a polearm, which I was also really pumped to see because I love this. Like, this sounds so cool for druids to be able to use just as a unique polearm. It could also maybe be a tripping weapon. And the idea of a scythe is just this like really honestly badass weapon that should be in a fantasy game. Like, why can't your fantasy character kind of try to embody that Reaper aesthetic? That needs to be in here. I don't know how it's not already. And the number 1 most requested type of weapon, which might be a little bit of like a gimme because I lumped some categories together here and people often listed like more than one of these names in their suggestions, were the brass knuckles / cestus, knuckle wraps, and the gauntlet. I don't know why this doesn't exist. This is such an obvious feature for just enhancing your unarmed strikes. Come on. And I think this is original enough for it to be its own unique weapon, and it could be variants with those claws and punching daggers. All those things can be a new, like, unarmed enhancement, like fist style weapon. And I'm really excited to start building that together, and really all of these weapons. So remember to like this video so more people will see it, subscribe or join Patreon if you really want to be part of this process, and check out this video, wherever it is, about some simple ways that you can homebrew weapons for your game. And keep building.